Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: an up to $10 million award for information that could help the FBI find 7 Chinese hackers. They allegedly breached email accounts belonging to millions of Americans. And among the targets, White House officials, 2020 presidential campaign staff members, and Western lawmakers.
I think this is more state-sponsored behavior, and I think the reason we do this is to get away from what we should be doing, which is actually sanctioning the Chinese Communist Party, and we should be doing that through sanctioning trade.
China filing a complaint against the U.S. at the World Trade Organization. That's over what it calls Washington's discriminatory rules on electric vehicles, but it left out what prompted the U.S. move. Chinese real estate giant Evergrande saying it won't continue with a U.S. plan to restructure its billions in debt. The company is closely rooted to the health of China's economy and remains in crisis. And the beauty of classical Chinese dance colliding with bomb threats. We look at the latest escalation in an ongoing disruption campaign believed to be orchestrated by the Chinese regime against a New York-based arts company. An up to $10 million bounty on 7 Chinese hackers. That's for allegedly breaching millions of Americans' email accounts. The FBI is doubling down on finding the culprit behind a global hacking operation. The cyber attacks targets range from White House officials, presidential campaign staff members, and U.S. companies to lawmakers in the UK and European Union. Both the U.S. and U.K. slapped charges and sanctions on the Chinese hackers Monday. The indictment said the hacking operation was backed by the Chinese state. It allegedly compromised millions of Americans' work and personal email accounts, cloud storage accounts, and phone call records. The hackers also reportedly lifted trade secrets. Among the targets are senators, campaign staff who worked on a 2020 presidential campaign, officials at the White House, the State Department, Justice, Commerce, Labor, Transportation, Treasury, and the FBI. Even email accounts of their spouses were not spared. The Chinese hackers also got access to various U.S. companies spanning industries from defense, finance, manufacturing, academic, IT, telecom, and legal. Academics, journalists, and dissidents were also targeted. Responding to the news, President Biden extended an executive order Tuesday. The executive order is from the Obama era. It declares cyber attacks against the U.S. a national emergency and sanctions hackers by blocking their properties. Beijing lashed out at the sanctions, calling them a political manipulation. FBI Director Christopher Wray warned in February that Chinese cyber attacks against the U.S. and its allies are reaching a fever pitch.
China's hacking program is larger than that of every other major nation combined. And that size advantage is only magnified because the PRC uses AI, built in large part on stolen innovation and stolen data, to improve its hacking operations, including to steal yet more AI tech and data.
U.S. allies are also feeling the impact.
We've been very clear that the situation now is that China is behaving in an increasingly assertive way abroad, authoritarian at home, and it represents an epoch-defining challenge and also the greatest state-based threat to our economic security.
The UK said the sanctioned Chinese hackers accessed information on over 40 million voters. The timing is sensitive because Britain has a general election this year. The UK government summoned the Chinese ambassador over the issue. New Zealand also weighed in on Tuesday, saying it raised concerns with Beijing over a Chinese cyber attack that happened in 2021. Its intelligence services found state-sponsored Chinese hackers breached New Zealand's parliament in 2021.
I'm not going to go into the details of the data specifically, but I will say that from the analysis that's been conducted, that sensitive or information of a sensitive or strategic nature was not removed from the system. Some information was removed from the networks, and we believe that that was of a more technical nature, the sort of data that would have facilitated more intrusive work.
The move comes a day after U.S. and British officials announced sweeping charges against 7 hackers, all believed to be living in China. Their targets are high-profile White House staffers, U.S. senators, British lawmakers, and government officials from across the world who have criticized Beijing. Another trade dispute. China filed a complaint against the U.S. at the World Trade Organization Tuesday. That's because starting this year, U.S. electric vehicle buyers can't get the up to $7,500 credit if the cars have components or minerals sourced from China. The regulation aims to reduce reliance on China. Beijing argues the rule is discriminatory. China dominates the EV supply chain, one example being lithium, a type of metal used to make EV batteries. China refines over 60% of the metal globally. The rule took effect in January. Under it, only 13 out of more than 50 EVs on sale in the U.S. are eligible for the tax credits, a dramatic plunge compared to 2023. The tax credits are part of the Biden administration's push into America's green energy transition. Biden has pledged to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 and hit zero emissions by 2050. But with China dominating green energy industries, some are wondering, could America's green energy future depend on Beijing? China holds a near monopoly on clean energy supply chains. On top of lithium, China also has a commanding hold on nickel and cobalt, minerals essential for EV battery components. It's the world's largest refiner of these minerals and supplies up to 70% of them. To discuss more about Washington's latest move against Chinese cyber attacks, we spoke to Brigadier General Robert Spalding, retired U.S. Air Force Brigadier General and author of War Without Rules. General Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks. Great to be back.
We saw the U.S. State Department is charging 7 Chinese nationals. This is with a widespread hacking campaign that targeted U.S. officials, saying that this was backed by the Chinese regime. Now, how seriously should we be taking this?
I don't agree with pressing charges, criminal charges against Chinese nationals. I think this is more state-sponsored behavior, and I think the reason we do this is to get away from what we should be doing, which is actually sanctioning the Chinese Communist Party, and we should be doing that through sanctioning trade. We should be doing that through sanctioning their banks. The reason we don't do that is because the U.S. corporate sector and financial sector puts pressure on the government to keep these in the realm of the criminal behavior. It's not criminal, it's state-sponsored, which means the only way that we get any traction is actually by doing things against the state. We're never going to get out of this problem with China as long as they're connected to us and as long as we treat it as an individual criminal activity. It's not an individual activity, it's a state activity. So it's almost like, pressing charges against the first troops that rushed into Ukraine rather than sanctioning the Russian government, which we did.
Now, it seems in terms of this hacking, it also impacted the UK with reports saying that the names and addresses of some 40 million British voters have fallen into the hands of the Chinese regime. Now, given that this is an election year for basically half of the globe, how should we read the timing of this?
Well, there's no doubt the Chinese Communist Party wants to influence our election for their own benefit. It's the same in other democracies. So they are pushing all the buttons. We have to expect that the candidates that are pro-China or at least going against sanctioning China are the ones they're going to want to see elected. And so we have to be aware this is happening. It's not just in the UK, it's here. It's all countries have to be aware that the Chinese Communist Party is going to use every dirty trick in the book to get their interests, within these individual countries.
Now, on that note, we're actually now seeing that China has filed a complaint with the World Trade Organization. This is against the U.S., saying that there's some discriminatory requirements for electric vehicle subsidies, which is quite fascinating due to other reports that shows that China's BYD, Tesla's rival, is actually getting those same subsidies if it sets up plants in Mexico and also skirt the hefty tariffs, import tariffs. How should we read this?
Well, the Chinese Communist Party does not believe in free trade. It believes in pro-China trade. And as long as they're a member of the World Trade Organization, the World Trade Organization really is not a free trade body. It's a pro-China trade body. I think they need to be removed from the World Trade Organization. I think they need to be treated as a mercantilist regime that is hostile to free societies. Free markets and liberty go together, right? Private property, the ability to do what you want with your property, to start businesses, to grow businesses, that goes along with this idea of democracy. It doesn't go along with authoritarianism, which is why the Chinese Communist Party doesn't believe it. So the fact that they're a member of all these free trade organizations, the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they should not be a member of any of those because they are not pro-free trade and they're not pro-democracy. And so they should not be a member of the liberal democratic order, or else it is not a liberal democratic order.
General Spalding, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Next, news from the property sector. China's infamous real estate giant Evergrande is dropping a plan to restructure its massive debt. That happening in a U.S. court Monday. According to Chinese internet company Sina, Evergrande Group is facing major challenges in its efforts to restructure its debts, leaving the company no choice but to terminate the plan. The real estate giant sought a New York court's approval last August to restructure over 84% of its offshore debts. That's over $19 billion. Evergrande offered creditors a basket of options last year. One path would mean swapping debts into new bonds, which would be linked to other units under the group. But that plan has failed, and investor sentiments toward the company remains low. Zooming out on what the group means for China's economy, Anders Core, principal of Core Analytics and a publisher, explained.
There's huge debts coming through on the property market in China, which amounts to massive portions of the economy, 25-30% of the economy, and huge amounts of Chinese personal wealth is tied up in the property sector. So it's a pretty big deal.
But the country's property crisis goes even further. Evergrande was recently accused of inflating its revenue by $78 billion, marking the biggest fraud case ever in Chinese history. Besides a $580 million fine, its founder and chairman has been hit with a separate penalty. He's also been barred from the securities market for life. Evergrande is the most indebted real estate sector in the world, bearing over $300 billion in debt. 2 months ago, a Hong Kong court ordered the giant to liquidate its properties and assets to pay off its debts. 3 bomb threats in just over a week, all aimed at Shenyun Performing Arts, a New York-based classical Chinese dance company. The danger was later revealed to be empty threats, but the message is clear: stop Shenyun from performing. Why? Because Shenyun dares to showcase China before communism, making it a top target for the Chinese regime. NTD's Jeremy Sandberg has more.
The first bomb threat against Shenyun Performing Arts this month targeted the company's headquarters in New York. An email account with a Chinese name said they'd placed a remote control bomb and threatened to detonate it. A Shenyun representative told the Epoch Times that the FBI is investigating the incident. Then email sent to 2 theaters threatened to blow up bombs if the theaters didn't cancel upcoming Shenyun performances. Last week, an account name with Chinese characters sent an email titled "The Theater Has Been Bombed" to a California venue where Shenyun was preparing for weekend shows. The email said, "We randomly placed a lot of bombs in the theater. Theater staff evacuated and called the police. Bomb technicians with detection canines found nothing in their search." A police spokesperson told the Epoch Times precautions were taken on the weekend, with no evidence of any type of explosive device. They stated the case and information was forwarded to the FBI for further investigation. A third bomb threat was sent to a theater in Vancouver, British Columbia over the weekend, but performances weren't interrupted. A Vancouver PD spokesperson confirmed that a theater bomb threat came in Saturday, with an investigation revealing it was false. The bomb threats turned out to be empty, but it's not the only disruptive efforts the performing arts company has faced. 2 of Shenyun's tour buses had tires slashed 2 weeks ago in Costa Mesa, California, the latest in a recurring series of incidents. The tires were vandalized the same way as previous times, halfway through the rubber to burst when driven on the freeway. Many of Shenyun's artists experienced CCP persecution firsthand in China for practicing Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. It's a meditation practice based on truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. The spiritual practice has been banned and persecuted in China since 1999. A Shenyun vice president said the threats are the Chinese regime's last-ditch effort to hide the truth, and that the threats are taken seriously with law enforcement authorities involved. Shenyun performs in around 200 cities worldwide for over 1 million people each year. Jeremy Sandberg, NTD News.
In addition to the bomb threats, show organizers in California also spotted a propaganda flyer titled "China is better under communism." Shenyun's artistic portrayal of China before communism is one of the reasons it became a top target for the Chinese regime. Recently, members of one of Shenyun's 8 individual touring companies were reportedly harassed at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago by a customs official speaking Mandarin with a mainland Chinese accent. The incident spurred several Congress members to call for an investigation. Separate from these incidents, the Epoch Times recently reported that the New York Times has been working on a hit piece aimed at the company. It comes after years of the outlets downplaying or ignoring human rights abuses happening in China. Communications obtained by the Epoch Times suggest the hit piece has been in the works for about 6 months. The Epoch Times says the article, which is not published yet, will play into the CCP's transnational repression campaign against Shenyun. This is significant because Shenyun exposes, through its expressive dance, the CCP's persecution of the peaceful spiritual movement Falun Gong. Those who practice inside China face harassment, jail terms, torture, and even murder, killed by forced organ harvesting, fueling the Chinese regime's lucrative organ transplant market. Beijing has long worked to keep the practice under wraps, as evidenced by pressuring theaters to drop performances and persecuting Shenyun artists' family members who are still in China. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 3 years. If you'd like to support us, consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus or subscribe to our partner platform Epic TV, where you can watch our full episodes. Just click the link down below. Here's what to look out for in our second half. Bomb threats inside theaters and attacks on performance tour buses. What's really behind the Chinese regime's alleged sabotage of U.S.-based Shenyun Performing Arts? Our guest weighs in on what's happening with the classical Chinese dance company.
And so we really need to look at this as a case study for how CCP's tyranny could be unleashed upon anybody on the world stage. And that's why it's really important to pay attention to this.
And South Korea voicing grave concerns over China's use of water cannons in the South China Sea. The latest confrontation injured 3 Philippine soldiers and damaged a vessel. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.